Good morning, scholars, and welcome back to Stories with Mrs. Prevey. We're on lesson number 3 today, which is the story of Rapunzel. And our learning goal is I can compare and contrast orally or in writing similarities and differences between the characters and the settings of Sleeping Beauty, Rumpelstiltskin, and Rapunzel. I'm going to take a picture walk back through Sleeping Beauty and Rumpelstiltskins and think about why they're considered fairy tales. So if we remember, in fairy tales, some of the characters, like these royal people right here, are realistic characters. They're peoples, they're kinds of peoples that can really exist. And some of your characters are considered magical. At least one or more of the characters are going to be magical in these fairy tale stories. So that's one common thing that fairy tales have together. We said both this royal princess and this old lady were real. They could exist in real life. Okay. And here comes the prince. And the prince and the princess end up getting married at the end of Sleeping Beauty. And in this story here, we have a king, and kings exist in real life. And we have the miller, and they exist. And here's the miller's daughter. That's a real type of person. But here we have the little man. And this, I don't know if this picture does a lot of justice, because in a lot of stories, you see this little man is really tiny. Maybe he would only stand about this tall. And there isn't any of these little tiny men existing today. They're make-believe. So these are all part of what makes a fairy tale a good fairy tale. And at the very end of this story here, we see the queen, and she gets to keep the baby. And she is no longer the miller's wife, but now she's the queen because she was married happily, and they lived happily ever after. And that's going to be another general theme, something you see across most fairy tales, is it ends in a happy event. It doesn't end sad. And generally speaking, a fairy tale is going to start with something like once upon a time or a long time ago, to tell us that it didn't happen in recent history. It happened in the past. So, in this story, Rumpelstiltskin, the queen has to discover Rumpelstiltskin's name in order to keep her baby. So, how do you think Rumpelstiltskin may have gotten that name? Have you ever met anybody called Rumpelstiltskin? I know I haven't. I'll bet you said, no, you never met anybody either. Do you know how your parents chose your name? You might want to pause the video and go see if your parents can tell you how they chose your name or a sibling's name. Because a lot of times these names have some kind of significance in your family. Did you pause the video and find out what the significance was of your name? I'll bet it didn't just come from nowhere. They had an idea or a thought about why they named you that. This also, in fairy tales, we usually see a problem that exists, and there's usually magical solutions to these problems. So today's story, well, is called Rapunzel. Look at this picture that I have up here on the screen. What do you think that's a picture of? All right, it kind of looks like a salad, but this kind of doesn't look like a salad bowl, does it? Kind of looks like a flower pot here. This is a special kind of lettuce, so you could actually eat this, but this lettuce is called Rapunzel. So that's actually the name of this kind of lettuce. So listen carefully to learn how a child in this fairy tale gets her name. You may have already heard the story of Rapunzel, but listen to this one because I'm betting this isn't going to be sounding like the Rapunzel version that you've already heard. There once lived a man and his wife who, more than anything in the world, wished to have a baby. Finally, one day, they learned that their wish would come true. Now, at the top of their house, top means the highest part of something. The top is also sometimes a toy. So at the top of their house, in the very back, there was a little window. And from this window, you could see a garden full of beautiful flowers and fresh vegetables. But around the garden was a high wall, and no one dared to enter the garden because it belonged to a mean witch. One day, the wife stood at the little window and looked down into the witch's garden. There she saw a fine-looking leaves of Rapunzel, which is a kind of lettuce. And it looked so fresh and green that she felt that she simply must have some. Day after day, she longed for it. To long for something means to want it very badly. So if you can see it growing down here, here's the wall. And there's that fresh Rapunzel lettuce. The more she wanted it, the more she became pale and sad, and when she could not have some. Her husband saw her looking so sad and became worried. "Dear wife, what is the matter?" he asked. "Oh," she answered, "I feel that I must eat that Rapunzel from the garden behind our house." Her husband loved her very much, and he thought, "I must get my wife what she desires. I will get some of that Rapunzel no matter what." What do you think this man is going to do? That night, he climbed over the wall and into the witch's garden. He quickly filled a sack with Rapunzel and brought it back to his wife. At once, she ate it with delight. Delight means great joy or pleasure. But she liked it so much and it tasted so good that the next day she longed for it twice as much as she had before. So that night, the husband climbed the wall and again picked more Rapunzel. He turned around to go back when he saw before him the angry eyes of the witch. "How dare you climb into my garden, you thief?" she hissed. "How dare you steal my Rapunzel? You will pay dearly for this." "Oh, please," said the terrified man, "be merciful." The man is asking the witch to forgive him and be kind even though he stole the Rapunzel. "I only did this because I had to. My wife, you see, she is having a baby, and she was looking out the window and saw your Rapunzel, and she needed some more than anything else in the world." "Well then," said the witch, "you may have as much Rapunzel as you want, on one condition. When your wife has the child, you must give it to me. I will take care of the child like it's my very own." Do you think the man should agree to give his own child to the witch? The man was so flustered that he said yes, and he tried not to think any more of it. But later, at that very moment, when his wife gave birth to a lovely baby girl, the witch appeared and reminded him of his promise. She brought the child to live with her. The witch named the baby Rapunzel. Why do you think the witch named that baby Rapunzel? Yeah, because of the lettuce. And she grew up to be a beautiful girl. When Rapunzel was 12 years old, the witch took her deep into the forest. There she locked her in a tower with no steps and no door, only a small window near the top. Why do you think the witch locked Rapunzel in that tower? I don't know. Whenever the witch wanted to be let into the tower, she would cry out from the ground below, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair." Rapunzel had beautiful long hair that shone like gold. When she heard the voice of the witch, she would open the window and let her hair fall down, down, down to the ground far below. Then the witch would hold onto the hair and climb up to the tower window. A few years had passed like this, when one day the king's son is the, I hope you said prince. The king's son is the prince. One day the king's son was riding through the forest, and he came upon the tower. As he came near, he heard a voice singing so sweetly that he stood still and listened. It was Rapunzel in her loneliness, trying to pass away the time with sweet songs. The prince wanted to go inside to see her, so he looked for a door in the tower, but there was none. He rode home, but the song had entered into his heart, and every day he went into the forest and listened to it. The song had entered into his heart means that the prince fell in love with Rapunzel's song. Once, as he was standing nearby behind some tree, who should come up to the tower but the witch? The prince watched, amazed, as the witch called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And then he saw how Rapunzel let down her long hair, and how the witch climbed up it and went into the tower. He thought, so that is the ladder. Well, then I too will climb it. The next day, as dusk fell, dusk is the time of day when it starts to get dark, he came to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And she let down her hair, and the prince climbed up. How do you think Rapunzel will feel when she sees it is the prince and not the witch who has climbed up her hair? Rapunzel was greatly frightened when she saw the prince, for she had never seen a man before. But he spoke kindly to her and told her how her singing had entered his heart, and how he felt he could have no peace until he had seen her. Then Rapunzel forgot her fear, and when he asked her to be his wife, she put her hand in his hand and said, "I would gladly go with you, but I have no way to get out. Do this for me. Next time you come, bring a bundle of silk. Then bring some more each time you come, and I will make a ladder of it. When it is finished, I will use it to climb down from this tower, and then you will carry me away from here on your horse." They agreed that he would come to her every evening, since the witch only came in the daytime. So things went on this way until one day, Rapunzel, without thinking, said to the witch, "Why do you climb up so slowly? Well, it takes the king's son only a moment." "Oh, you wicked child," screamed the witch. "I thought I had you hidden here from all the world, but you have betrayed me." In a rage, the witch grabbed a pair of sharp scissors and cut off poor Rapunzel's hair. Rage is very strong anger. Why is the witch in a rage? When the witch took Rapunzel from the tower, Then the witch took Rapunzel from the tower and brought her to live deep in the forest. Later that day, when evening fell, the prince came and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." What's going to happen? Is Rapunzel up there? The witch lowered the cut off hair and the prince climbed up. But instead of seeing his dear Rapunzel at the top, he saw the gleaming eyes of the witch. "Aha!" she cried, and laughed at him. "You came for your darling, but the sweet bird is no longer in its nest, and sings no more. You will see her no more," filled with horror and sadness. Horror is a strong feeling of fear or shock. The prince fell from the tower. The fall did not hurt him badly, but the thorns on which he fell cut his eyes and blinded him. Blinded means he can't see anymore. So blind and alone, he wandered in the forest for several years, eating only roots and berries and weeping over the loss of his dear Rapunzel. At last he came to a place in the forest where Rapunzel herself was wandering. He heard a sweet voice that he thought he had heard somewhere before. When he went toward the sound, Rapunzel saw him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and wept. When Rapunzel's tears touched the prince's eyes, he could see again. He was both happy and amazed because he thought he'd never see her again. And so the prince took Rapunzel to his kingdom to be his bride, where she was welcomed with great joy. They were soon married, and they lived happily ever after. In the beginning of the fairy tale, what does the woman long for from the witch's garden? Yes, Rapunzel, the lettuce, Rapunzel. What happened to her before she gets some? She became pale and sad. What does her husband do? He steals the Rapunzel from the garden. Do you think there is another way he could have solved this problem? I don't know. I guess he should have asked the witch for it. When the witch catches the husband in the garden, he asks her to be merciful. What does the witch then say the husband must do if he wants Rapunzel from the garden? He must give the child to the witch when the baby is born. Do you think he makes a good decision to agree to the witch's demand? That one's kind of tough because he was scared, wasn't he? But who would want to give their baby to a witch? What does the witch name the baby? Rapunzel. Why do you think she named her Rapunzel? Because she's named after the Rapunzel that her father stole from the garden that her mother ate. What happens when Rapunzel is 12 years old? Yes, the witch locked her in a tower and it had no doors and only one window near the top. How does the witch visit Rapunzel now? Yes, she climbs up Rapunzel's hair. How does the prince discover that Rapunzel exists? Well, the story says one day when he's riding through the forest, the prince hears Rapunzel's voice singing sweetly. What happens when the witch finds out that the prince has been visiting Rapunzel? Yes, she gets very angry and she cut off Rapunzel's hair and takes her from the tower to live alone in the forest. Then she tricks the prince into climbing Rapunzel's hair, and he falls from the tower. Does this fairy tale have a happy ending? Why? Or why not? Yes, because the prince finds Rapunzel and her tears allows him to see again, and they get married and they live happily ever after. What happens in this fairy tale that is a fantasy? Right, you really couldn't climb somebody's hair. And your tears aren't going to help somebody to see again. That's true. In this read aloud, you heard, he quickly picked up a handful of Rapunzel. He quickly picked a handful of Rapunzel and brought it back to his wife. At once she ate it with delight. Say the word delight. Delight means great pleasure or joy. I look forward to the warm weather and flowers of spring with delight each year. I also look forward to seeing you with delight. So tell somebody in the house with you about something that you look forward to with delight, or some tell someone about sometimes that fairy tale characters and tales we've read about so far feel delight. So make sure you use the word delight and use a whole sentence when you talk about it. Go ahead and pause the video and do that. All right, did you tell somebody in the house with you about sometimes that fairy tale characters in these tales we read about feel delight? Very good. All right, so we need this one. We're looking at our fairy tale elements. So again, these are elements of a fairy tale. And we talked about the setting is where and when. Settings are both where and when a story happens. We've talked about characters. Some of them are real and some are magical. Events that are fantasy can't really happen, but they happen in fairy tales. We talked about fairy tales having problems and solutions and an ending. We've talked about all those things in this story, Rapunzel. Let's see if I can find it with my mouse. Right up here. Rapunzel is where it says right here. Has all of these things as well. The setting of a story is the time and place. Many fairy tales begin in a special way that gives a clue about when the story takes place. Listen carefully while I reread the first sentence of Rapunzel. There once lived a man and his wife who, more than anything in the world, wished to have a baby. Although this fairy tale doesn't start with the words once upon a time, the word once tells us that this story also took place long ago. So right here, when was a long time ago, but where does this story take place? Mostly, I would say the witch's garden and the tower, because that was someplace different. Okay. Let's see. Let's take a quick walk back through this and see who our characters are in the story right here. Let's go all the way back up to the beginning of the story. To go back and reread a little bit. It just says there once was a man and his wife. So a man and wife are very real characters. Man and wife. Now, you're not really expected to have to be able to read all the words. You can probably read some of them. Let's continue our walk through the story. There's the man and his wife. And there's the witch. Do witches really exist? No. They don't, so that's going to be a fantasy character. This guy, what is he? Yeah, he's a prince. Are princes really real life type people? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Prince can exist. So we'll add the prince and as real characters. Let's see, is there any more characters I'm not thinking about? Just the witch. Okay. I'm looking still. Nope, it appears just to be the witch. And the witch is going to be our magical character. And that is all the characters in that story. So, what are some elements of fantasy that we might have seen in this story? Well, really, I think that one element is, I'm probably pretty sure you said climbing hair. That's probably not something we would do in real life. I don't think you could. I think another fantasy that I seen in this story was being locked in a tower. That probably wouldn't happen in real life. What are the problems that were in this story? Let's think about this. Well, the first problem was the woman. Who wants the Rapunzel. From the garden. That was the first problem. And then Rapunzel. Now I have to give her this one a capital because this is her name. Now this one gets a lowercase, right? Oops, I spelled it wrong too. Oops, so that one gets a lowercase. It's not her name. This is a proper name right here, Rapunzel. Rapunzel gets locked in the tower. And then later, later Rapunzel is taken deep into the woods and left alone, right? So later, I'm gonna locked in a tower, then the woods. And then also the blinding of the prince, right? So that was another problem. Prince was blinded. Wow, this story had a lot of problems, didn't it? So what were some solutions to those problems? Like, how did these problems get resolved? So does she get the Rapunzel from the garden? A solution would be how does she get that Rapunzel? So the husband agrees to give the baby to the witch for the Rapunzel. That was how that got resolved. Now, Rapunzel got locked in the tower and then moved into the woods, and the prince was blinded. So let's see. How was that resolved? So the prince finds Rapunzel, the capital R to show it's her name, and gets the sight back, right? So that happened. So that resolved all the problems. And what happened at the end of the story? Well, at the very end, the Rapunzel marries the prince, and they what? Live happily ever after. Happily ever after. There we go. So these are the elements of Rapunzel. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair. Okay, right here, I have what is called a Venn diagram. And with a Venn diagram, let me get a little bigger for us. With a Venn diagram, we can help organize our thoughts or compare different stories. So when we look at this circle right here, this circle represents the story of Sleeping Beauty. And then this circle represents the fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin. These are all fairy tales. And this circle right here represents Rapunzel. Now, where they overlap, see this space between these two stories, it would be where the events that took place were not only in Rumpelstiltskin, but they would also be a part of Sleeping Beauty. Or this space right here would be if they were part of Sleeping Beauty and part of Rapunzel. If they're the similarities between both Sleeping Beauty and Rapunzel. And this space right here would be similarities that were Rumpelstiltskin and Rapunzel right here. And this space right here, where all three of these circles are overlapping, this little tiny space shows how all of these would be the same. So whether you're talking about characters or the setting or any specific thing in the story that makes them all the same right here. So one thing is I can start by putting in a little text right here. These stories are all what? I hope you said fairy tales. So I can actually put fairy tales right here. I'm going to have to shrink it down if it's going to fit. It's going to be teeny tiny on there. That is still too big. Whoops. I didn't want to make it bigger. I don't know if I can get it down in there. Here we go. So I will put it here that they are all fairy tales. Because they really are fairy tales. Oh, all right. So we can look at the different story elements that we talked about. So this one is Rumpelstiltskin, and we said the setting was in the king's castle, and it happened a long time ago. And really, I think you're going to look, and when you see right here, so Sleeping Rapunzel was the witch's garden and the tower. When did it happen? A long time ago. When we're going to look here and see that Sleeping Beauty was the king's castle a long time ago. So when did these stories take place? They all took place a long time ago. So we can actually put that right here in the center. This is going to be super small. Let's see if I can zoom in to make it seem bigger. So I'm actually going to try to put that in here, and I might have redrawn this to give me more space, but I'm going to try to type that in here, right? A long time ago. Boy, that didn't work out very well. Let's see if we can fix that, make it a little smaller. All right, so they all happened a long time ago. They are all fairy tales. Now let's go back and look at Rumpelstiltskin was the king's castle, right? So I can look here. And Sleeping Beauty also happened in the king's castle. But Rapunzel was in the witch's garden or the tower, so that one would be different. So I can say Rapunzel and Sleeping Beauty both happen in the king's castle. So I can put this text here and put the castle, right? And then for Rapunzel, it's not going to be the same as any of those. So I'm actually going to put that down here. The witch's garden and the tower. It doesn't share that with either one of these two stories. It's all on its own. So these two, if you can see, Rumpelstiltskin's circle wraps around here, and so does Sleeping Beauty's circle. So they both share that they were both taking place in the castle. And right here, this little bit is part of, do you see if I go around Sleeping Beauty's circle, this little bit fits in there. It also will go, if I go this way down Rumpelstiltskin, this little part is part of Rumpelstiltskin. And if I wrap around this circle, it's also a part of the circle of Rapunzel. Because a long time ago, all of these stories were created a long time ago. And all of them are fairy tales. Okay, so let's go back and see what else we can compare. So here we have a miller, a king, a miller's daughter, a queen, and a servant. And that was Rumpelstiltskin. And then in Rapunzel, we had a man and his wife and a prince. Did you see a prince in any of these? No. But I do, you could say that there was a royal family in that one. Okay. So we look in the elements of Sleeping Beauty, we see kings, queens, princesses, prince, and the old lady. So Sleeping Beauty and Rapunzel both had a prince in it, right? So Sleeping Beauty, right here, here's Rapunzel, there's the prince. Here's Sleeping Beauty, here's the prince. And when we look at Rumpelstiltskin, there's no prince here. There's a queen and the miller's daughter and a king, but there isn't a prince in this story. So we're going to go back to this one and say Sleeping Beauty and Rapunzel. So right here in this box, I can say there is a prince in both of these stories. Prince. There isn't one in Rumpelstiltskin. I'm really having troubles getting this to move. So we don't want it to be in the circle that represents Rumpelstiltskin. See, it's part of this Sleeping Beauty circle and part of Rapunzel, but it is not in this Rumpelstiltskin story. So we don't include it there. Okay, so once again, let's see. I don't remember seeing a miller or a miller's daughter in any of the other stories. Let's see if there's one here. This is a man and his wife. So far, just Rumpelstiltskin has a miller and a miller's daughter. And then let's look at Sleeping Beauty. The king, the queen, the prince, the princess, and the old lady. So for Rumpelstiltskin, and only in this circle, I don't want it to be in part of this circle, because only in the story of Rumpelstiltskin was there a miller and the miller's daughter. You see? So let's take a look again at some more that we see. Well, Sleeping Beauty had a king and a queen and a princess and a prince and an old lady. Let's look. Does this Rumpelstiltskin had a king and a queen, right? So let's see. Rapunzel had a man and a wife and a prince, but no king and no queen. So we can say that Sleeping Beauty and Rumpelstiltskin both had a king and queen. So we want the king and queen to be included in the circle that says Sleeping Beauty and the circle that says Rumpelstiltskin, but not in the Rapunzel circle. Okay. So here we go again. The servant only occurred in Rumpelstiltskin. There was no servant in any of the other stories. So the man and the prince were in Rapunzel. The man and his wife and the prince were in Rapunzel. And Sleeping Beauty had the old lady and the princess. Did I see a princess in any of these? Not in this story. And Miller, a king, a miller's... No, not in that story. So Sleeping Beauty had the princess. And what was the other one? The old lady. So we can use this Venn diagram to keep comparing and contrasting these different stories. Right? We can talk about where. We've talked about when, which was a long time ago. We talked about the characters. We talked about them being fairy tales. Where, the witch's garden, right here. And the castle for them. And then we can look at different problems. Oh, the magical creatures. This one had an element of a little man in Rumpelstiltskin. Was there a little man in Sleeping Beauty? No. Was there a little man in Rapunzel? No. So we can put it here. We can put the little man. Oops. All right. So then who was our magical character in Sleeping Beauty? Were fairies. Did we see fairies in other stories? No. So we can write that here. Okay. Fairies. Fairies. Okay. And Rapunzel. Who was our magical character? The witch. Was there a witch in Sleeping Beauty or Rumpelstiltskin? No. So we can put the witch down here. The witch. All right, good. Now we can also take a look at some fantasy events. In the story of Rumpelstiltskin, the fantasies were that Rumpelstiltskin spun gold, and the little man appeared, and the Rumpelstiltskin stomped himself into the ground. That's kind of silly, right? So each of them have had problems, and they've all had solutions, and we just compared our different stories as far as our settings and our characters. Okay. Today's learning goal was I can compare and contrast orally or in writing similarities and differences between the characters and the settings of Sleeping Beauty, Rumpelstiltskin, and Rapunzel. I think we've done a really good job on that. So this is the end. Oops. This is the end of our story today. Today was Rumpelstiltskin's Lesson 3 of Fairytales. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for part 1 of The Frog and the Prince. Have a great day.